Hello everyone. Welcome to Super Coaching UPSC by Textbook. This is Venkatesh, your faculty for geography. In this session, we will be discussing about a very interesting system or very geographical phenomena which actually has a huge impact in terms of the climate of that region called as air masses. You might be hearing about cyclones, you might be hearing about temperate cyclones, you might be hearing about some of the things like blizzards in America. They have a strong correlation of understanding with respect to a concept called as air masses. Have you ever heard about this word, air mass? Have you understood about how does it help to actually leads to formation of certain concepts? Let us try to understand. So if you see here, there's a huge vast cloud. The picture is having a understanding of it's having a huge cloud, isn't it? Right? So let us try to understand about what is an air mass. We might have heard about winds. We might have heard about the things like the things like ocean currents and all. Very similar to that winds, we also have something called as a air masses. What are these air masses? As the name itself was suggesting, they are air masses. These are large, uniform bodies of air. Uniform bodies of air. What do you mean by large? To what extent you can call it as a large? Definitely there will be so much variations, isn't it? Here, the moment you are saying large, they can be large enough for thousands of kilometers. They can be large enough of, say, things like even up to few kilometers onto the atmosphere. Say up to few kilometers from the surface. Sometimes even to the point of tropopause. So 10 kilometers onto the surface, from the surface into the atmosphere, 1000-kilometer stretch, you are having large uniformity of temperature. You have large bodies of air which have uniformity. Uniformity in what? They are hot or they are cold, they are warm. Uniformity in terms of temperature. They are also having uniformity with respect to what? Humidity. An air mass can be dry, not having moisture. An air mass can also be wet, not having more amount of moisture. And when you have such kind of things, the temperature could be extremely hot, warm, cold, or similarly temperature can be extremely humid. All these kind of things is what we call it as the air mass. What is an air mass? Large bodies of uniform bodies of air where the temperature or the humidity of such air, temperature or the humidity is uniform, which is almost for thousands of kilometers from the horizontal direction, and from the vertical direction it can extend until up to tropopause. That is what we call it as an air mass. Am I clear, all of you? Have you got a basic idea of what is an air mass now? Have you understood this? Right. So this is what I will call it as an air mass. So air mass is large uniform bodies of air having thousands of kilometers of uniform temperature, humidity, and sometimes even extending up to few kilometers. If you wanted to know in that way, definitely there are some areas which we need to call it as the source regions. Air masses, the source regions. Now, sources. Where do you think that these air masses will have some kind of sources? Definitely, for this much amount of uniformity of temperature, this much amount of humidity to be observed, do you really think that it can occur only at certain place? Definitely not. It will be occurring only at particular. Do you really think that it will be occurring at every place? Definitely not. There are only certain conditions, certain regions which are able to meet that conditions at certain time of the year. That time of the year is what we need to understand. For example, can you see here on the map, I am using about a certain word here called as a smaller C and a smaller C and a capital P, which we call it as continental polar. For example, if this is a region of Siberia, the moment when I say continental C, it is continental, indicating what? Away from the ocean. When you have away from the ocean, do you really find moisture? Definitely not. So the maritime aspect or the moisture aspect is met by something called as continental. Similarly, there is something called as M, maritime. What does it talks about? It talks about the moisture, having more moisture. You can see MT, you can see ME, all this talking about maritime. P talks about the C and the C. You look at the first word, C and M. C is talking for continental, M for talking for maritime. Then you see the capital words. We represent in this way. Why I am trying to tell you this? Please understand. Polar. The moment I say an air mass called as CP, that is continental polar, continental means dry air mass, polar means cold air mass. So this is a cold air mass which is extending out. Now this source, why it is able to develop only in the regions of Siberia? You understand the concept? You know that in the Siberia temperatures are fairly less or high. Temperatures are fairly very less. Why? You are away from the ocean. This is one of the region which is known for extremes because there is no diluting agent. Look at from all the different directions. You see that everything is surrounded by land. You are talking about latitude which is very, very high. You are talking about temperatures in the winter which will fall down like anything. The temperatures in this part of the world, the average temperatures will be around -30, -35, sometimes even extending to 50 degrees, -50. So if you see the temperatures here are such less temperatures, and that is spreading across a huge region. Because of that, that entire air, be it across 1,000 kilometers, be it among the vertical stretch, everything is having around dryness because there is no characteristics of any kind of moisture, and everything is cooler because of the latitude and the continentality concept. Because of that, the characteristics of this region, the source, is having a characteristics of dryness and coldness, which will be converted into the particular source for the particular characteristic for that air mass. Now you see, imagine this air mass is moving in multiple directions. As it starts spreading, what does it do? It comes into the new sources, new destinations. Whatever the characteristics it has, it will start transforming to that particular region. So what does an air mass does? An air mass, if it has certain characteristics of hotness, warmness, it will transform this hotness to that region. It will transform its characters to that region. So air masses are large uniform bodies of air having uniformity of temperature and thing. They are found in regions which are having such characteristics. You see a vast ocean. Definitely, when you talk about a vast ocean, you can see there it is having more moisture and it is coming from the warmer parts of the world, MT, maritime tropical. Similarly, you can see here, this is Saharan desert, one of the huge area. Land is very, very fastly extended. If that is the thing, that is the reason why it is called as, you can see that it is continental because of the landscape, because of the interior of the extent of the land, continental. Because it is part of the tropical part of the world, it is hot, continental, tropical. So what is this? In other words, hot and dry air. This is nothing but hot, dry air. Whereas you see here, this is cold and dry air. This is what? Cold and dry. This is what? Warm and tropical. It is warm and wet. The opposite of this, hot. Okay, the opposite of this one, cold. You are finding warm. You are finding here warm. You are finding here air is dry. Here it is wet. So definitely they carry more moisture. What happens is, when such kind of geographical phenomena start meeting, that is when the magic happens. What will happen when such kind of things? You will try to see this. If you see it here, have you ever heard about something called as a battlefront? For example, you will find one region where it is warm air and moist air. There is another air mass which has developed, and this air mass is a cold air and it is dry air. Now imagine two contrasting air systems which have contrasting phenomena, big one meeting point. Remember, in terms of the wars, we call something as battlefront, right? What is a battlefront? The place where the war happens, where two contrasting armies are meeting. For example, the hypothetical movies of this Bahubali. You all remember the Mahishmati kingdom on one side and the Kalakeyas on the other side, right? So you can see the contrast of the armies meeting point. If you see such kind of things, when such kind of two contrasting armies are meeting, we call it as battlefront in war. Similarly, when two contrasting large volumes of air with contrasting features like warmness, like dryness, like moistness, when they meet, that meeting point is what we call it as a frontal zone. And this frontal zone is always having so much amount of disturbances, so much amount of atmospheric phenomena. So why do you learn? To understand about the atmospheric phenomena. Understand about something called as atmospheric phenomena. Let us see it further. You see here more. Let me see here. So example, can you see this continental polar for North America? North America, continental polar. Can you see the maritime tropical in this? Now, imagine, how do these big air masses start moving? They start moving because of various pressure differences. They start moving because of various differences of atmosphere. If this is a large uniformity of cold air, definitely it is high pressure. This area should be relatively low. To compensate it, it starts moving. As when this cold air mass starts moving in the North American side, do you remember the Great Lakes of America? Whenever this region's Great Lakes is under the influence of this cold air mass, and now they are carrying moisture, when there is warmness out of the cold air, out of the Great Lakes, or when they are under the meeting of this maritime weather, now suddenly what is happening? There is a huge air mass which is very, very cold. It is interacting with the warm air mass. The warm air will be violently lifted upwards because it cannot be easily interacting with it. It will be violently lifted upwards. Because it lifted violently, you will find sharp showers, decent torrential downpour of rainfall. You will see good amount of rainfall, and you will see that it leads to such kind of scenario will stay for around until the entire warm moisture is completely dried out. So when these things meet and when they interact, they generally try to transfer their characteristics, to completely transfer their characteristics and to become a normal weather phenomena, and completely the original atmosphere phenomena are restored. It will take at least around a decent amount of time. That decent amount of time, they show you the hell. That is the reason why these air masses are very, very important. I hope you are able to understand, all of you, what is the idea of an air mass, how they are important, right? Now just see it here. Then the polar, you said, T for tropical, as I told you, E for maritime, E for equatorial, and there is also A, capital A for Arctic, which talks about very, very cold, or Antarctica, CAA, it is very, very cold. Arctic, Antarctica, very, very cold. Polar, cold. Then you see tropical, warm. So you are talking about warmness, very, very warm, hot, equatorial. So you can talk about the temperature characteristics, you can talk about the moist characteristics. When they start moving, as I told you, so you need to understand something called as source regions. Which areas are actually conducive for such kind of air masses? When there are such kind of, what do you say, consistency of a certain weather. Consistency of a certain weather. If there is frequent mixture, you don't find such kind of things. Only when there is a consistency. Now, once they're developed air masses will transfer their characteristics. What is that? Transfer their characteristics towards a developed air mass will transfer their characteristics towards a, say, the destinations. So one such thing I am trying to tell you here in this picture, you see here, there is a warm and moist air coming from the ocean. There is a cold air, and when they start meeting, that is the center of severe storms. So what happens? See, when two contrasting air masses are meeting, what will happen? The air will be interacting with it like anything. As the air would be interacting, it is not forced to mix it up. This is very, very cold, very difficult to mix it up, so it is violently lifted up. As the warm air is violently lifted up across the cold air, immediately sudden changes in terms of weather, immediately you will find rainfall, there is a consistency of rainfall. Now the problem is, because they extend for huge kilometers, 500 kilometers, if you imagine an air mass is of 500 kilometers, the cold air is such huge pile of air that for it to dilute, it takes time. That is when this transfer destinations will have a huge thing. Do you remember? We used to say this, Himalayas protect India. I think you can all remember, this is the Himalayan region. Himalayas protect India from cold Siberian air mass. Had there been no Himalayas, this continental polar air mass would have entered into South India, say until the central India, say Bhopal, and you can see 0 degrees Celsius even in Bhopal. So that is the phenomena of air mass. So air masses are very, very important in terms of their formations. It takes unique temperature. It takes about unique climate. They cannot be found everywhere. They can be found only in certain places where such temperature is conducive enough for large periods of time. There is a consistency. Then whatever the characteristics they develop, they will transfer these characteristics towards their destinations. That destinations are very vulnerable to such kind of severe weather storms is the reason why we are studying about something called as air masses. Hope you all have understood this. That is about the air masses. If you want the PDF file of this, you can actually get into my Telegram channel. If you have any geographical doubts, you can ask me. And any kind of further things about any doubt about geography, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you for watching. Have a good time.